And now your Idaho real estate news.
When it comes to escalation clauses, there are two sides to that story. You'll find some real estate licensees that think they are awesome, while others think they are no good. This is Mike Johnston, contributing editor for Idaho Real Estate News. So what are escalation clauses and why do we need to understand them? I've read numerous articles from real estate practitioners, legal professionals, associations, as well as statements from buyers and sellers in transactions where escalation clauses were used. Let's talk a bit about what they are and the pros and cons that these individuals have found with them. First, what is an escalation clause? Donna M. Arioldi, in her April 26, 2021 article entitled, "What is an Escalation Clause and What Are the Risks?" published on brickunderground.com, she shares an example. Quote, "If you bought a place in New York City 6 or 7 years ago when the market was very competitive, you may have heard of buyers using an escalation clause. This is a creative strategy brokers use to make sure it's their buyers that get the winning bid as competing offers come in. As a buyer, an escalation clause automatically increases your offer by a certain amount, say $5,000, each time another buyer makes a higher bid. It's the real estate version of eBay and essentially eliminates the back and forth of offers and counteroffers. It can help you get the place you want, assuming a higher offer doesn't exceed your maximum offer. However, there are risks involved. For example, you reveal your hand to a seller by indicating you are willing to go higher than your original bid. There's also the risk that the top offer might exceed the appraisal value, and you might not be able to get financing at the higher price. As a seller, you risk selling at a price lower than what might be generated by simply waiting for other offers or asking for a buyer's best and final offer," end quote. What are the pros and cons of escalation clauses? Thane Merrill wrote an article called "Escalation Clause, When and Why You Should Use One." He wrote that for fortunebuilders.com. He claims, quote, "Using an escalation clause has many apparent advantages, not the least of which combat the possibility of becoming an afterthought. If for nothing else, the single most important reason investors and buyers include an escalation clause in their initial offer is to remain relevant. In suggesting you are willing and able to increase your offer when necessary, it's a lot less likely to be regulated to the trash bin. However, of particular importance is the ability of an escalation clause to keep an interested buyer in the running. An escalation clause is nothing less than a rebuttal to the most recent offer, and it could be the one decision that lands you the property of your dreams. Outside of the obvious, the inclusion of an escalation clause in real estate deals may result in the following additional benefits. Escalation clause real estate contracts provide peace of mind for buyers who want the subject property. Done correctly, including this clause in real estate deals may prevent the buyer from overpaying. Provided the verbiage is up to the task, the clause should escalate the offer just enough to land the deal without going too far over. This clause works heavily in favor of sellers, as they are almost always guaranteed a higher offer under the right circumstances. Prospective buyers won't be left out of negotiations or overlooked in the event they provide an escalation clause. Sellers may look at offers with an escalation clause more seriously, giving the edge to anyone willing to include one," end quote. Now, he goes on to share what he thinks are some potential disadvantages in using an escalation clause. Thane says, quote, "While I can wholeheartedly argue that including an escalation clause in your next offer has inherent benefits, it's not without its flaws. Namely, an escalation clause requires interested buyers to lay all their cards out on the table. As a buyer, that's not a good thing by any stretch of the imagination. You see, by including an escalation clause in your offer, or more importantly, a cap, you are identifying the maximum amount you are willing to spend. And while a seller may appreciate your honesty, it all but destroys your chance of negotiating a better deal. What's more, a poorly calculated escalation clause can eat into your bottom line, Sure, it could help you land a deal, but at what price? If you aren't careful, this clause could have you spending a lot more on a property than you should have. In addition to disclosing the amount you are willing to pay, there are a few downsides to including an escalation clause in real estate deals. Their inclusion downplays one of the buyer's greatest advantages, negotiations. By including a clause that discloses the amount someone is willing to pay, there's less room to negotiate profit margins. While the real estate industry has come a long way, there are still many people that don't know what an escalation clause is. If a listing agent doesn't understand what this clause is, for example, the inclusion of it may cause some confusion and delays. Select sellers may be put off by the inclusion of escalation clauses. While they are most likely welcoming the idea of a buyer paying more, they are usually made with the original intent to undercut impending offers. There are times when the inclusion of an escalation clause can cause issues with bank appraisals. While rare, some sellers don't want to deal with the inclusion of an escalation clause, end quote. There are lots of others who have opinions on this subject as well. I'd like to point out that the Idaho Association of Realtors has come out with a form for its members to use. They've done it so out of a request to have such a form, but they warned that, quote, by publication of this form, the association does not endorse or recommend the use of automatic escalation clauses, notice, or offers, end quote. It doesn't sound like legal counsel is very supportive of it. In fact, there is a major disclaimer on the online video tutorial that explains how the form may be used. On the form, there are several additional disclaimers as well. Some of the statements that I've been given about the use of escalation clauses have been, in the event that a buyer missed out on a property, if a maximum amount your buyer is willing to pay is $300,000, then why did your buyer not start out at $300,000? If they really wanted the home, they should have offered what they were willing to pay. Another, a listing agent said, instead of accepting an offer with an escalation clause, I explained to the seller that they could just reject the offer and counter back at or above the escalation clause's maximum price. They know what the buyer was willing to pay, so why not counter back and get it? Another, the biggest drawback of an escalation clause that I see is that if you are a buyer, you are giving away your hand up front. There is no playing poker with an escalation clause in an offer. And lastly, if you missed out on a deal, if you're a buyer and you really wanted the property, you should have offered more. Remember back in the day when you had 2 or 3 offers come in on a property that you had, and then you had to call the other agents back to let them know that the offer they submitted was not accepted? Remember how upset some of those agents were? Then, when you used the multiple counteroffer form, you had even more people upset because they all thought that they had an accepted offer when it lacked that last additional signature stating that the seller agreed that their offer was the one. Now, there is this new document that some practitioners use when we have multiple offers submitted, and several of these offers have these escalation clauses that keep raising the price up and up and up. Now we have even more people upset. It may simply come down to education and intent. There are times when an escalation clause may be useful and times when it might not be appropriate. I believe it is important to explain to the potential buyer what this clause does and does not do for them, and to make sure it is what the buyer wants you to do. Please educate the buyer, and if you feel that this is a viable option for them to use, then fully explain it to them so they can make an informed decision whether to use it or not. It is all about them, our customers and clients. We do not decide things for anyone. We are advisors helping them with real estate. We can explain things and give them our opinion. The final say is up to them. Please provide them with education. We would not like the next round of lawsuits come from buyers suing agents for the use of escalation clauses. When in doubt, reach out to your broker and ask them for assistance about what your office policy is towards escalation clauses and how they want you to handle them. This has been another segment of Idaho Real Estate News. If you found this article useful, please share it with others. Subscribe by adding us to your Alexa Flash Briefing or by sending us an email to johnston@micro.com. That's johnston@mykro.com. We have a website with all of our past topics that have been discussed. Visit the website IREN.news for more information. There you can also submit topics you would like us to cover. We are available for you to subscribe and listen to us as a podcast. You can find us on many of your favorite places where you subscribe to other podcasts. Search for Idaho Real Estate News. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel for more insights on forms and other real estate topics. For Idaho Real Estate News, I'm Mike Johnston.
Idaho Real Estate News is updated weekly.